Mm-hmm. Where we've done like,
Was last year's summer, wasn't it?
I
Something
don't
like that.
know, but I mean, when we were just starting, I remember making a whole podcast and being like, oh my God, we didn't record any of that.
We didn't record.
It was a really good conversation, guys, and you just missed that.
It's like, oh my
Sorry.
God, and says stupid.
Sorry. Okay.
Hit the damn record and
Hit the damn record, see we record something.
Premiumbeat.com.
Hey, friend.
Friend. Welcome to the Jailhouse Rock. I'm just kidding. I'm just looking at my stripy shirt. Welcome to the Unlikely Frenz Podcast.
Where two friends living abroad talk about race relations, and
how we feel about it, what it means to us,
and everything in between.
Sometimes gossip.
Mm-hmm. So, my dear friends, if you are watching us on YouTube, you follow us on Facebook, and you listen to us on Spotify, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you know when we post a new video. So, ding, ding, baby, ding, ding.
Ding a ding. So, dear friend, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about something that is
heavy.
I saw this. This is a bit contentious. I saw this topic actually on a psychology podcast, and I can't remember what that podcast was right now. But the topic really interests me about how white supremacy and about white supremacy and the narcissism playbook, and how white supremacy and narcissism are linked. And I thought it was very, very interesting, so I decided to talk about it just a little bit today. It might be a little bit disturbing for some people to listen to. I have to say that off rip, but
if this makes you uncomfortable, good.
Yeah, good. But, I want to say that before we start today's episode, I just want to make something very clear about the conversation we're about to have. This isn't about throwing around buzzwords or trying to provoke outrage just for the sake of it. I mean, we're not here for that. And what we're doing today is looking at patterns that psychologists talk about, patterns historians have documented, and patterns that have shown up over and over again and again whenever systems of domination try to justify themselves. The reason this conversation matters is that people often treat white supremacy as if it's just an old political ideology from the past. But the truth is, it operates through behaviors and narratives that are still recognized today. And you look closely at behaviors, and they start to resemble something very similar in psychology. Now, I am not a licensed psychologist, and I don't think Desma is either, but we still want to touch on this topic with you.
And that's where our conversation begins. These behavioral patterns that sustain white supremacy often look almost identical to the behaviors that we associate with narcissism. Let's clarify something right off the cuff. so that nobody misunderstands what we're trying to say, that
Mm-hmm.
we're not diagnosing anyone, right? Because like David said,
Right.
we are not
Absolutely.
psychiatrists, we're not psychologists. We're just sitting here saying that how we feel, but we're not saying that entire groups of people are mentally ill.
Absolutely.
That's not what this is about.
No.
We're talking about behavioral dynamics, things like denial, entitlement, projection, gaslighting. These are patterns that psychiatrists, psychologists identify as narcissistic behaviors. And these patterns show up repeatedly in systems that are built around social and racial hierarchy. And
Mm-hmm.
once you start recognizing those patterns, the similarities are hard to ignore.
So, in this first segment, we're going to touch on the need for superiority. So, let's start with one of the most obvious traits associated with narcissism, the need to believe that you are superior. In psychological terms, narcissism often involves constructing an inflated image or inflated self image, I should say. A narcissistic person needs to believe they are the most important or more important, more deserving, more intelligent, or more exceptional than the people around them. And this belief becomes central to their identity. Now, if you look at the ideological foundation of white supremacy, it's built on exactly that premise, the claim that one racial group is inherently superior to others. That belief wasn't just a casual opinion either. It was embedded into law, culture, education, and even pseudoscientific theories designed to justify uh, inequality and uh, other things that that oppress minorities. But here's the contradiction: real superiority doesn't need laws to enforce it. It doesn't require violence to maintain it. It doesn't need propaganda repeated for generations in order for it to survive. When a system constantly has to prove its superiority by suppressing others, what you're actually seeing isn't confidence, it's actually insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And that insecurity is the part that people don't really want to talk about, right? Like, because these systems of domination often project like the image of like strength and authority, sometimes even masculinity. They often present themselves as natural leaders of a civilization, or maybe a guardian of progress within that society. They defend the order of the society that they're in.
Mhm.
But when you look at it really closely, you can see something else, and that is fear. And
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
fear that inequality will expose this myth of superiority, right? The fear that
Mhm.
once everyone has access to the same opportunities, the same social structure, that that illusion that one group of people is inherently better might collapse. And that's why systems built on hierarchy, um, especially
I think,
racial hierarchy, works so
yeah,
hard
racial hierarchy. I was just going to
that
say.
it's really hard to maintain that narrative, right? The narrative of
Mhm.
superiority, the narrative of I'm better than, and not because it's true, obviously, but because the system depends on people believing that it's true.
Right. So, in this next segment, we're going to get into gaslighting. Another behavior pattern commonly associated with narcissism is gaslighting. Now, some people know, some people don't know, but gaslighting is a tactic where someone denies reality so uh, persistently that the other people start to question their own experiences. It's psychological manipulation. Now,
Make you think that you're
think about how,
crazy.
yeah, they make you think that you're crazy, basically, yeah. Now, think about how often conversations about racism follows this pattern. There are mountains of historical documentation about segregation, discriminatory housing policies, racial violence, and unequal access to resources. Events like Jim Crow laws shaped generations of American life. Policies like redlining systemically restricted where Black families could not live and build wealth. These things are all well documented. And yet, you hear people say things like, racism doesn't really exist anymore. Or you'll hear things like, people are exaggerating. That's gaslighting, because just because they don't experience it or they don't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And this invalidation of what people experience by imposing your reality on them is literal gaslighting.
Mm. And that the purpose of it is very simple. It's controlling the narrative.
Mhm.
And because if people can be convinced that discrimination either never happened or it no longer really matters, then the system that has benefited from that discrimination never has to confront any consequences. Um, and it allows institutions to maintain an image, right? An image of like
Mhm.
fairness without actually addressing any of the historical injustices that have happened. And gaslighting doesn't it doesn't distort it doesn't just distort history. It distorts people's understanding of the present. And that that distortion, it protects the status quo.
I would even go one step further and say that this is not only a distortion of history, it is also a perversion of history.
Mm. Mm.
So, in this next segment, we're going to talk about projection. Another hallmark of narcissistic behavior is projection. Projection happens when someone accuses others of the exact behavior they themselves are engaging in. Donald Trump. It's it's a psychological defense mechanism. And when you look at history of racial rhetoric, projection shows up constantly.
Mm.
Groups that are subjected to oppression are often portrayed as violent, uncivilized, or dangerous. Meanwhile, the same societies making those accusations are responsible for colonization, forced labor systems, and racial terror. Projection flips reality upside down. The aggressor becomes the victim, and the victim becomes the threat.
And once that narrative takes hold, it becomes incredibly powerful. Because if people believed the oppressed group is dangerous or inferior, then discrimination starts to look like projection rather than injustice. And suddenly oppressive policies can be framed as completely necessary measures to maintain order in this society. And that narrative isn't just manipulative or misleading. It's strategic, and
it's strategic. Yeah, absolutely.
It redirects attention away from the real sources of harm. We start to look away, and we don't know who the real enemy is. To quote the Hunger Games.
To quote the exactly, case in point, right?
Who's the real enemy here?
Who's the real enemy here? Let's say, hold up.
Yeah. If you like hearing about these uncomfortable truths, like, share, and subscribe.
So in this next segment, we're going to talk about entitlement. So another characteristic often associated with narcissism is entitlement. That's the belief that certain privileges belong to you automatically, that you deserve advantages simply because of who you are. Now, historically, white supremacy functioned exactly on that assumption. Political power, economic opportunity, and social status were often treated as birthrights reserved for certain groups. Let's say it. White men. That entitlement wasn't subtle either. It was written into law, reinforced through cultural norms, and protected through institutions.
And when entitlement becomes normalized, equality can start to feel like injustice to the people who benefited from that system. That's an important point. When people are used to having unearned advantages, losing those advantages can seem like and feel like to them oppression and unfairness,
right?
Even when it's actually happening in the expansion of fairness. And that's why conversations about equity sometimes provoke such strong reactions, because they challenge the idea that the privilege is something that people are just naturally owed.
And we see this now within the Trump administration. I mean, look at the president of the United States himself. He is the epitome of entitlement. He has what we called failed his way up, simply because he is a rich white man, professed Christian, although I have my druthers. People latch on to that, and people see him as the pinnacle of what it is to be a white male in the United States. And because of his white male status, he is entitled to be the top of the heap. And that's where that entitlement comes from, I think. He has literally failed up, where lots of white men do. And also white women, I have to say. They fail their way up. They are less qualified than other minorities, but because they are white male or white woman, they get to have that position because uh, it's normal for them to have it.
Because that's what we're owed, David.
Yeah, it's really it's
My
perverse.
eyes,
It really
if my
is.
eyes could roll out of my head. If they could, I would be holding each of
If
them
they
in my
could
hands.
roll out of my head and onto the floor.
Oh, Lord.
What was that? She said, Madeline Kahn, flames
On the side of
on
my
the side of my face.
burning.
That's how I feel sometimes.
Uh,
In this segment, we're going to talk about control of the narrative. Now, another behavioral pattern common in both narcissistic individuals and oppressive systems is control of the narrative. Who tells the story? Matters. Who writes the textbooks? Matters. Who decides
mm,
which historical events are emphasized and which ones are minimized?
mm,
That matters too. When a system controls a narrative, it can shape how entire generations understand history. And that's why some stories are celebrated while others are forgotten.
mhm. And the stories that get forgotten are often the ones that are filled with uncomfortable truths, you know,
Absolutely.
the truths about exploitation and resistance and resilience of communities that refused to accept injustices. And when
Mm,
those stories are excluded from the narratives, the mainstream narratives, the result um, is a version of history that feels, well, incomplete. Well, it's
hmm
untruthful, but it's
Yeah.
incomplete. And incomplete history uh, makes it easier for those myths to survive.
Right, to survive, to keep going. Ugh.
Mm-hmm.
It's so horrible. It really is. How people can anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In this last segment, we are going to talk about reaction to accountability. Now, the final pattern we should talk about is how narcissistic systems respond to accountability. It's probably not a positive reaction, more than likely. When narcissistic individuals are confronted with criticism, the reaction is often defensive, uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sprinkled with anger
Mm-hmm.
rather than reflection. And the same pattern shows up in systems of power. When people raise concerns about racial inequality, the conversation shifts away from the issue itself and towards accusations that the discussion is unfair or divisive. That shift changes the focus. Instead of addressing the problem, the debate becomes about whether the problem should even be addressed or discussed.
Mm-hmm. And that response protects systems from scrutiny, uh, from a closer eye, because if conversations about injustice can be labeled as or framed as attacks, then accountability becomes easier to dismiss. Um,
Yeah.
avoiding the conversation doesn't make the problem disappear. It just postpones, the work that needs to be done. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yes, thanks for doing this with me today. It was a heavy one.
Heavy.
It was a heavy one. Yeah, it was a heavy one. So, to all of our friends who are watching us on YouTube, following us on Facebook, and listen to us on Spotify, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you know when we post a new video. So, ding, ding, baby, ding, ding.
Ding and ding. And thanks for listening, everybody. And
Absolutely.
Thanks for chatting with me today, friend.
You're very welcome. I'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Deuces.
Yeah.